Hello, and welcome to today's Sunday Scope. Mundo de Pepita.
Ooh, hello.
Hello. Hi. Welcome to Mundo de Pepita, our Sunday Scope. And today we're going to talk about how to reduce student interruptions and blurts. So, we would like to remind you that we are Mundo de Pepita, resources for teaching Spanish to children. And you can find us online at elmundodepepita.blogspot.com. Hello, Joshua. Thank you so much for joining us. I saw your, your ad for your scope earlier today in Boston. That was awesome. And yes, welcome. Hello.
Apologies about the camera. We're trying to hold the camera differently.
Yes.
So.
Buenas tardes. Nice to see you. I'm going to have to put on my glasses in order to be able to read. Hola. Hola. You're still out and about, Joshua. That's awesome. It looked like a beautiful day. It's beautiful here in Maine as well. So we are going to talk about 2 quick tips today for reducing student interruptions and blurt outs. And again, we are Mundo de Pepita. You can find us online at Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, on our blog, Snapchat, and Pinterest. So, wonderful. Wonderful. So as you know, in many of our classrooms, thank you for sharing on Twitter, Joshua. Thank you so much. And I did want to give a huge shout out to you, Foreign Language Classroom, World Language Classroom, who has been so incredibly supportive to us, Mundo de Pepita, and thank you so, so much. We really appreciate it. Today's conversation about 2 quick tips to reduce student interruptions and blurts. A few years ago, actually several years ago, my team specials for phys ed, art, music, thank you. No, you are. And phys ed, we got together and we were talking about what is the single most difficult and disruptive student behavior that we have that is also chronic. And what we determined, in fact, was that interruptions and blurts are our most difficult behavior to deal with. Certainly there are other ones out there, but that more than anything else, because it's very chronic, is very disruptive. So 2 quick tips to how you can deal with those behaviors. And they might be maybe a little bit surprising. Maybe not. Our first tip is ignore. Ignore the interruptions and blurts.
It's backwards.
Oh, okay, it's backwards.
Asking if the writing's backwards.
Oh, the blurters. Yeah, we love those blurters. Is it backwards behind me? Could you give me a yes or a no?
The letters?
The words. It's all right. Oh, it's good. I'm dealing with that these days. Absolutely. And you see correctly. Thank you so much. Yeah, I find that interrupting and blurting is a really difficult behavior. So if we are establishing in our classroom an expectation that, for example, if a student wants to say something, they're going to raise their hand. And I'm not talking about that general conversation that we're having with our kids or those interactions where kids are participating actively as a whole group. That is, of course, not what I'm referencing. I'm referencing those call-outs, those blurts, those if it's one kiddo's turn and another kid interrupts them or they're interrupting you when you're trying to give an instruction. Any of those types of behaviors, that's really what I'm trying to focus in on. So most of us have established that rule of please raise your hand if you have something to say. Levanta la mano si tienes un comentario, si tienes una cuestión. Those are our general expectations for most classes. But then you have the kids who, your hands in the way. We have those kids who interrupt or blurt out anyway. So my biggest tip is to ignore that behavior. Don't feed into it. One of the conversations that we had as a team, music, phys ed, art, library, etc., was what is an interruption, strangely. We had to define that out, and what we realized was that interruptions are not just those things that are completely random and off topic, but also those interruptions that are on topic but are still interruptions. And if we react to them, if we answer or respond to those behaviors, then they continue, and it's really hard to stop them. So we came up with, as a team, that one of the things we were going to do was we were going to ignore any interruptions. We were not going to answer them. We were going to require our students to follow the expectation in our classroom, which is to raise your hand if you have something to say and wait to be called on. I have to say, this and number 2, second tip, are really challenging, I think, as a teacher. It's so hard for me, especially those on-task interruptions. It has to do with what we're talking about. It's so hard to ignore those. But if my ultimate goal is to keep my kiddos on task and not being rude to one another or me, thank you, Joshua. Ignoring the interruption, absolutely. It is truly important to not feed into it, because then you're sending the message that interrupting is actually okay. Hello, Michelle. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm just talking about our 2 quick tips for reducing student interruptions and blurts. Absolutely, it does take practice, Joshua. I totally agree. Ignoring is something that you really have to set as a goal for yourself. Smiley face, thank you. It's a goal that you have to set for yourself, a professional goal, to say, if in my classroom I'm establishing the expectation that kids will raise their hands to make a comment or ask a question, that I am going to ignore when they are not doing or meeting that expectation. And the second one, so quick tips, do you follow up later? Ooh, good question. It depends on the interruption. With little kids in particular, a lot of those interruptions are very much off topic or are completely random. Or we have those kiddos who call out the answer when it's someone else's turn. And I'm going to share a sign that we do in my class in just a moment to help kids with that desire to also have the answer. So I'll show you that one in just a second. If it is an answer that is or a question that is on topic, I would encourage kids to then do what the expectation is. What do you do when you have something to say? Si tienes un comentario, ¿qué haces? Levanta la mano. So I would model for them what they could be doing instead. Oh, hello, Marilee. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Julie from Mundo de Pepita, resources for teaching Spanish to children. And we are talking today about 2 quick tips to reduce student interruptions and blurts. Our first one was ignore. Hola. Our first one was to ignore those behaviors if they do not meet our expectations. And the second one is be consistent.
Can you see it?
I can't. Blurters don't want to disrupt. They want to be involved, usually. That's really true. I think it depends on the type of blurt, but it is really true that they want to be part of the conversation. And so that's one of the things I'm going to show you. The sign helps them to be part of the conversation without overriding their classmates or me. One of the big expectations for my classroom is we have 2 that are my global rules are that we are our kindest selves and we use our best manners with one another. So talking over someone or stealing their turn isn't your best manners, and it's not being your kindest self to someone else. So what are other ways that we can participate and be part of the conversation while still maintaining that level of kindness? So the second one is being consistent, and this applies for every piece of classroom management, in my opinion, anything that you do, whatever your expectations are. And again, it is, I think, the most difficult thing as a teacher. If you're going to set expectations, then you have to be consistent in terms of managing those expectations. If I say you're going to raise your hand, then every time that you blurt, every time that you interrupt, I have to then redirect you and remind you what do we do in my classroom? And I have to do that every time. And honestly, I think that is one of the hardest things as a teacher to do, is to be consistent, especially when you're tired, you're sick, or the kids have made you a little exhausted. Being consistent every single time, consistency is crucial. It's so true. And it is, like I said, I think very challenging to do. So if your expectation is that they're going to raise their hand in order to say something, to make a comment, or to ask a question, then thank you, Joshua. Then you have to stick with that yourself. So anytime that there is an interruption or a blurt out, you're going to redirect and remind them what they can do. And of course, the one thing they can do is raise their hand and wait to be called on. So here are my 2 signs that I use in class to help with this. Proactive, not reactive, absolutely. So this is where we get into some important pieces of responsive classroom. You're setting up these expectations. Here's what you can do instead of being a blurter. So obviously raising your hand, right? We want kiddos. Hello, welcome. So glad to see you. We've just been talking about 2 tips for reducing student interruptions and blurts. The first being to ignore those behaviors when they are happening, not feeding into them. And the second one being consistent with your expectations. So this is the piece that I will share with 2 signs. The first is when I ask my kids to raise their hand, I do random selection for most things. But if a kid has a question or a comment that they want to add to the conversation, then raising their hand is appropriate. But I go a step further and I have them raise their hand and put their finger over their lips, so that reminds them that raising their hand is not enough. A lot of kids think that, oh, if I just raise my hand, then I can say whatever I want to say. The finger over the lips reminds them that they have to wait to be called on. And the second sign that I do, thank you. Thank you so much, Joshua. The second thing I do comes from Responsive Classroom. You can go to responsiveclassroom.org. They are unbelievably amazing. Blurts are welcome in Periscope. Definitely. Absolutely. Responsive Classroom has a sign that we do that goes like this. Okay, so you're making this. Blurters want to be the first ones to give the right answer. That is so true. And unfortunately, there are many other kids in the class, and the blurters tend to take over the conversation and run the show all of the time, which is really unfair to those other kiddos. And so, as I was referencing earlier, my 2 biggest expectations in class, we are our kindest selves and we use our best manners. No, it's awesome. I love all of your comments. And that's what Periscope is about, right? Sharing the conversation. So we want to keep our kids, all of them having turns and being able to participate in the conversation. So as I mentioned earlier, kids want to be part of the conversation, but they can't always override everyone else. So using this sign, this is, in Responsive Classroom, what this means is I think like you think, or me too, or I agree. You can use it in a lot of different ways. They also have another sign, which means I have a connection, but I use this one all the time. And I teach it to the kids at the beginning of the school year, and my whole school uses this, so it's really great. It gets reinforced across all over the school. So what I teach them to be able to do is if they have the same answer, or they agree, or they're thinking like someone else, instead of calling out and saying, me too, or I had that answer, or I was going to say that, or I agree, or yeah, I like that too, they just do this. So it's a silent message to the rest of the class that they're part of the conversation. They have that opportunity to be involved, but they're not running over anybody else or talking over anybody else, interrupting them or blurting out. It is a very effective gesture. I absolutely love it. We use it at home all the time, me and Matthew. It's really great, and you have to train them. You have to teach them how to use it and model it and practice it. But once they get it, then it is very powerful. The thing that you need to do is be consistent in requiring it in your classes. So if this is going to be your sign for saying, yeah, me too, definitely, it is a real American Sign Language. It comes from, Responsive Classroom uses it, and it is incredibly effective. I use a lot of other signs. Yes, it is an ASL gesture. I use quite a few of them in my class. They're so effective. This one is great. Absolutely. Joshua says that having other teachers using it in the school is very helpful. It is. Across the entire school, we're all doing this, so we're all reinforcing it. And the more that you do that and the more consistent you are, if I have kids calling out or blurting out, me too, or that was my answer, then I will say, what can you do? And I'll show them the gesture. What can you do to share that out? And the more I remind them and reinforce that, the better they get at it. And again, that goes back to being consistent and really following through with your expectations in your classroom. Those are our 2 quick tips with the 2 signs that we use in class to help reduce student interruptions and blurts when other teachers see. Absolutely, that is so true. Other teachers, and as I said earlier, we as a team, specials, the art, music, phys ed, and music, I think I said music, sorry, and me, we're trying to be really consistent across our 4 classes to help with some of those issues that are really tricky, and interruptions and blurts are definitely one of them. So again, as a recap for our scope, our 2 quick tips for reducing student interruptions and blurts were 1, to ignore those behaviors. If your expectation is that kids will raise their hand in order to make a comment or a question, then you want to be, you don't want to feed into those interruptions when they happen. And secondly, being consistent with that expectation. If your expectation is to raise your hand, yes, they are the best. The specials rock. So true. Students raising their hand, be consistent to always expect that. Remind and redirect them. Reinforce that behavior. As I said, I have my kiddos put their finger over their lips to help remind them not to call out when their hand is raised. And the second one is that gesture that helps them be part of the conversation without blurting out and using their words. So that is today's scope, our quick tips. Thank you so much. We are Mundo de Pepita, resources for teaching Spanish to children. Thank you so much. I'm so glad that you find them useful, Joshua. And you can find us online at elmundodepepita.blogspot.com. Thank you for the hearts. And of course, follow us on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Pinterest, and Snapchat. Thanks again. Yes, and no English. You're right. Love it. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you next time. Have a beautiful day. Adiós. Gracias a ustedes. Muchas gracias. Chao.